Hello, and how good is cricket? Welcome to the Midwicket Podcast. My name is Sunny, and I'm excited to wrap up the Border Gavaskar Trophy. Today is, I think, roughly the 12th of January, so we're about a week or so after the end of the Test series, which Australia has won 3-1. A riveting Test series, really interesting storylines all the way throughout, and hopefully you've joined us for some of them. If you haven't already, please do subscribe, like us on YouTube, follow, share, do all the above. Now, I've got two guests that are all familiar for everyone. We've got Hilsey and Kishan. Both of you, welcome back to the podcast. Hope you're both doing well.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Hey guys.
Boys, it's been an incredible test series. We're at the end of it. We've had time to digest everything that's happened and really excited to have a chat to you about what's going on here, what's happened, I should say. Kishan, you're coming all the way from Bengaluru, all the way from India, and I'm wanting to firstly get your views on what your feelings are after you've seen this Australia 3-1 victory.
Well, I gave a lot of chat to the boys at the office, saying how good India are, and after that 3-1 loss, I've had to catch a flight to India and leave Australia, unfortunately. But no, it was a very entertaining, a very interesting series. Not only in terms of just the cricket, but also in terms of the niggle between the two teams. So it very much delivered. Obviously, the result didn't go the way that I hoped and many others hoped, but it was still a fantastic series to watch, and can't wait for the next one.
Absolutely. And Kishan, you predicted at the start of the series that maybe the Indian fan wouldn't be so happy, and you did predict that maybe Australia would get up. And unfortunately, that's what happened. Hilsey, what are your feelings in amongst all of this?
Yeah, look, again, it was a series that delivered. I personally really enjoyed it, just being more of a neutral. And in Australia, you don't see many Border Gavaskar Trophy series where ball dominated the bat. I thought I think there was only one batter that maybe averaged over 50 for the whole series and being head. So it was good to see wickets, falling and spicy decks being produced as well. So for me, as a watcher of cricket, as a lover of cricket, I thought it was a really good series. Credit to Australia when credit's due. I thought they were probably just a little bit better throughout the five tests. But again, it was 3-1 in the scoreline. It probably wasn't a blowout as much as that sort of reads into, and I think there was some moments in test matches which could have gone either way. So it would have been nice to have a bit more of a close sort of finale, but 3-1 was a great series. Australia at home too good, so I thought it was pretty special.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty special series as well. It started all the way back at the end of November, which seems like such a long time ago. India were so dominant in Perth, wrapping up that test match in about 3.5, 4 days' time. Since then, the whole tide has gone Australia's way, really. They were dominant in Adelaide, wrapping up that test match in about 2 days and one session. They probably should have won Brisbane, the Gabba, if it weren't for the rain. Melbourne was one of the most amazing 5 day test matches that we've seen in recent years. India had its opportunities to both hold off the game as well as maybe even to win the game, and they didn't take it. Australia did in some clutch moments. And then finally, there was Sydney, which again was a seesawing game. Australia, probably the more professional and dominant of the teams in that test match as well. And then, whilst India again had its chances, it was Australia that was clutch, was Kobe in so many moments, and ultimately came out winners on top to win 3-1. So many interesting storylines throughout. Healsey, where do you think this series ranks amongst other Border Gavaskar series of past?
I think it will definitely be a memorable one. I think, cricketers, we always talk in extremes. And I think, like, if I was going to talk about an extreme, this is the series where we've seen a bit of life and death, in that we've probably seen the life of and the birth of a new cricketer in in Sam Constas and Jaiswal on Australian shores, and I think that's going to be pretty exciting going forward, and us watching them and seeing how they're going to go in the Test circuit going forward. But I think we've also probably seen the death of a few cricketers as well, especially here in Australia. So there's been a couple of retirements and potentially more coming. Even so, I don't think we'll see too many of the Indian batters potentially back here in Australia in a couple of years' time. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. Even with Australia, they're going to have an exodus at some stage as well. So yeah, in terms of all BGT series, where does it rank? It's up there, but I think we're probably going to realize maybe in years to come, it's like, hey, remember when we saw Constas and Jaiswal that first time here in Australia? That was pretty special. So maybe time will tell where this exactly ranks, but again, pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Hilsey, and Sunny as well. You alluded to it. This series will be remembered for a lot of moments, but I think it is an interesting one. I don't think it quite matched the heights of the previous Border Gavaskar Trophy in Australia, purely because I think this series had more moments defined by average cricket or poor cricket rather than amazing moments. You alluded to Melbourne, where India lost, where they really should have drawn or even potentially won the test. I mean, and that test is probably typified by mistakes that India made in the field or with their running between the wickets. I think in terms of moments and in terms of storylines, this is going to be a memorable one. But in terms of the actual quality of cricket, it was good without being great, I think.
Now, Kishan, why don't we start with yourself with this one? As a fan, having watched these 5 test matches here, did you have maybe a couple of moments which you thought really stood out as a fan favorite moment for you?
Oh, absolutely. As I said before, it wasn't short of moments. For me, the number one moment had to be Bumrah's wicket of Khawaja on the last ball of the day in Sydney, and then turning around and staring down Sam Constas in the second test. That, to me, encapsulated, both teams perfectly. Bit of spice, incredible skill, and just a bit of byplay between the two teams. Just a little bit of friction, which I personally love. It was. I didn't think it crossed the line as well, which is nice to see. There wasn't any words exchanged yet. Potentially, there was a bit of in your face, celebrating. But to me, that was the standout moment of the series. And again, probably being a little bit biased, just Bumrah in Perth and Melbourne, two of the best spells of bowling I've seen. Certainly from a visiting bowler that I've ever seen, but that was truly special to watch a guy really get talked about as the best bowler of all time. I don't think we've ever seen that. Is he the best bowler? That's another discussion for another day. But those 3 moments really stood out for me.
No, and of course it would be you that would point out the clickbait moment in the whole series, Kishan, to say that was your favorite. But I think in years to come, we will definitely sit back and say we have seen a generational bowler, and it was an opportunity to see him live. I was lucky to see him in Perth, in Melbourne, and in Sydney, and it was remarkable seeing him do his work at his best. How about you, Hilsey? Did you have some fan favorite moments from this series?
I'm going to speak purely as a fan here, and like with cricket, I think there's just an air of predictability. Like you can, as a watcher of cricket, you can almost see the field that's set and see how a bowler's trying to get a wicket. You can see where the batter's, if it's full, the batter's going to drive. If it's short, the batter's going to pull or cut. So there's that air of predictability. One thing which I didn't see coming this whole series was day one, Boxing Day in Melbourne, when that first session, I was there. It was hot, and we have a young upstart 19-year-old who's playing and missing and trying to do all sorts. And see the crowd react to how he, started scooping and reverse scooping Bumrah, who looked unplayable, in the test prior to that. It just for me, there was a little bit of a shift in the mentality, a shift in the approach, and again, it was just something that no one really saw coming. And it for me, it was a really big defining moment in the series, and moreover, it's probably going to shape how cricket and Test cricket's going to be played in the future. When there's maybe not so much of a reliance of being able to defend, and when the going gets tough, how to counterpunch. So I think again that shift forward to how cricket might be played in the future is pretty exciting. And that moment for me, it might be something we look back on a few years and say, "Hey, remember when that happened?" And now it's happening all the time. So something along those lines.
Oh, I love that, Hillsy. I love the view to the future as well in all of that. You've mentioned Constance's name at the start as well. So I know a lot of fans absolutely loved seeing that and the fact that it came off. I personally really enjoyed the nostalgic part of the series. I enjoyed VK Virat Kohli hitting that 100 in Perth. And then later on, Smith under pressure without runs coming back and hitting 100 as well. So there was a bit of nostalgia for me to have a couple of those fan favorite moments. Hilsey, can you mention a few of those moments in this series where you felt, I can't believe that was a headline, or a surprise from this series where you're like, I can't believe that just happened?
I'm going to speak about the all-timers, and with Indian cricket, there's always a bit of byplay with the coach and the players, and sometimes between the players themselves. And the headline which caught me a little bit by surprise was the mid-series Ashwin retirement when he wasn't chosen for that third test. For me, a big fan of Ashwin, even though he can rub people the wrong way. His skills are undeniable, and for him to call it quits mid-series when there hasn't been a result going either way at that stage. It might have been 1-0 or 1-1, sorry, at that stage. It was a bit interesting to see how, and things have played out in the media afterwards, where Gambhir has told him that you're probably not going to be selected, and then I think even his father had some words of where there was a bit of disrespect. And again, this is all a bit of conjecture and speculation, as I think Ashwin poured a bit of cold water on that afterwards. But it was something that maybe caught me a little bit by surprise. I think there was going into it, I thought Ashwin had to play a holding role, and they didn't even go with him in the first test. So again, that was probably a big surprise for me in that series.
Well, I mean, Hilsey's rightly pointed out the Ashwin retirement, but I'll go with going back to Constance again, but probably Andrew McDonald's comments following, I think it was on day 3 or day 4, a couple of days after the Bumrah kind of stare down, to come out and say that India were being too intimidating. I didn't think I'd live to see the day where an Australian coach would come out and would say that the game needs to be a little, the opposition needs to treat them a little bit better. I found that a little bit surprising, and maybe it was all just a bit of gamesmanship of trying to get India to focus on the man and not the game and situation, and you could argue that it worked. But yeah, I was just a little surprised to see that, especially when there were no real words exchanged and Constance didn't seem too bothered by it. And there was no real friction. There was no touching or anything like that. So I was a bit surprised to see an Australian coach come out and tell the opposition to cool it with their antics.
Yeah, that certainly was a heated moment, and there was some interesting aftermath to all of that. For me, the biggest surprise, or maybe a little bit of disappointment in other fans, which did come as a surprise to myself, was the behavior of some fans towards the stars that we have. I mean, we saw someone like Virat Kohli and even once Jasprit Bumrah as well, as they're walking off the field, having to turn back and trying to respond or reacting to what fans have said. Now, we're seeing two of the best teams going around. Yes, they're polarizing. Yes, people are allowed to have a view, but maybe I was a bit surprised by how polarized people have become in cricket. They can't let cricket just be cricket, and they let their emotions get the better of them, and to the point that they're disrespecting the cricketers, just letting them do their job. It may have been that someone got out or took a wicket, and that made someone feel extremely happy or extremely sad. but getting to the point where they are urged to say something to players as they're walking off. Personally, I felt that was a bit of a surprise. I hadn't seen it to this extreme before, and I was a bit disappointed maybe in fellow fans watching cricket at its peak. Um, I'm sorry to have to bring that little sad note to this whole series. Why don't we have a look at some of our predictions at the start of this series here, and I'll go through some of the highlights here. Kishan, you mentioned that Australia is going to win 3-1, and you also predicted that India is going to win in Perth. I'm just going to stick with you here for a bit, Kishan. You mentioned that the radar was going to be on Australia and particularly their batting. You thought McSweeney was a big choice for the opener, especially since they had that rejig at the start of the series. And you thought that Smith was maybe under a bit of a hammer at that stage as well to score some runs. Speaking about the Australian batting, Kishan, how do you reflect upon how the Australian cricket team went then?
It's a really interesting situation that Australia finds themselves in. I feel like the Australian batting lineup is not too dissimilar to India's batting lineup in the last Border Gavaskar Trophy, where you had guys like Pujara and Rahane who were probably coming towards the end of their career, but were still serviceable. And it feels like that's what this Australian batting lineup is, with guys like Khawaja and Smith, who have phenomenal records, but just quite aren't at the peak of their powers. Smith averaged 35 in this series. Usman Khawaja averaged 20, and I think he came out after the series and said he got boomeranged, which is fair enough. But they're both, Usman Khawaja is going to be 38 soon, or if he's not already, and Smith is, I think, 35, 36. And it's actually interesting to look at their averages in the Border Gavaskar Trophy compared to the World Test Championship in this current World Test Championship cycle. Head was the standout batsman. He averaged 56, and he's averaging 36 in the World Test Championship. Smith averaged 35 in the Border Gavaskar. He's averaging 35 in the World Test Championship. Marnus averaged 26 in the Border Gavaskar, averaged 29 in the World Test Championship. Usman Khawaja averaged 20. He averaged 35 in World Test Championship. Carey averaged 31 in the Border Gavaskar, averaged 29 in World Test Championship. And Mitch Marsh, who was dropped for the last test, averaged 10 in the Border Gavaskar, but averaged 36 in the World Test Championship. So, I mean, I think what this series more so told me was, there's been a shift, especially in India and Australia, I think, that the pitches are becoming a lot more bowler friendly. And while their numbers are not, obviously Smith averaging 35 compared to his average of 50, 55 or 56 doesn't look great. Perhaps it's time for fans to make a little shift to recognize that averaging 30 is the new 40, and averaging 40 is actually averaging 50 a couple of years ago. So, there's no doubt that Australia's got some about their line, and which is odd to say about. I think they're regarded as the best test team in the world at the moment. So it is. They've definitely got a few retirements on the horizon. So we'll see what happens. But I don't know if this series really confirmed or denied anything that we already thought about the Australian team.
And Hilsey, one of your things right at the start of this series was you don't know where India's going to get 20 wickets to win. You predicted rightly that Bumrah would be the leading wicket taker this series, and you thought that Australia would probably share the wickets amongst themselves. We saw Stark and Cummins get plenty, and Boland take on Hazelwood's role really well towards the end and take so many wickets. The surprise there probably is that Lyon didn't have a very big series. In fact, none of the spinners had a very big series at all. But now that we've seen this BGT, Hilsey, what are your thoughts on the Indian bowling attack and maybe where they could have gotten better?
Yeah, I think the Indian attack, I always had that concern that, on tracks that aren't favorable to spin, how are they going to get 20 wickets? And I was pretty confident in Bumrah, but certainly not as confident as he was and how he produced. I didn't expect him to be that far and above the best bowler from both teams. He was incredible and almost unplayable. And we can almost see in that fifth test when he wasn't there for that period because he was having scans and was off the ground. India looked a little bit toothless with the ball, and part of me was hoping that just for as a neutral and just to see some good cricket, I was hoping that the supporting cast that came down last time in Natarajan and Saini, and we'd be able to find someone new for India who can do more than a job and be a bit of a support role. But it seemed that Bumrah didn't have a whole lot of support with the ball. Siraj was again showed a bit of passion and showed a bit of fire, and he might have got similar wickets to Stark, but he didn't really get them in that first spell, or it was always towards the back end of just before that second or that second new ball. He got a few on a roll, and he was okay towards the end of the Test series, but when the series was there to be won, he found it a little bit tricky, and I just found that this Indian attack they sort of overpromised and underdelivered, bar Bumrah. I thought there'd be a little bit more, I thought there'd just be a little bit more in it for longer periods of time where, when Bat was on top, it was really hard to see how they're going to break a partnership other than Bumrah. So going forward, I still have those concerns outside of the subcontinent. I think they'll be able to define some more spinners. There's still players knocking about in Ranji Trophy and in India A squads that will get given an opportunity with in different conditions. But yeah, I still think going forward there's still a couple of question marks because now even with Bumrah and his body, how long is he going to last and how if he's going to be playing all formats and different tournaments like the IPL, it's going to be a big strain on his body and it's going to be having to test a bit of the bench strength of India. But again, I'm not quick to predict on Indian cricketers because I think it was said best by one of the Reichens in that Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum movie, where you just never know with India. So very very hard to predict what's going to happen, but we'll see what happens going forward.
That is an excellent reference point, Hilsey. Very niche, but wow, that was box office yourself, mate. That was awesome. Player management is definitely going to be one of those talking points with 5 test match series. There are bound to be players that are going to be injured, and it did happen on both sides. And it'll be interesting to see what happens for India's fast bowling stock going into the future. We know that Indian cricketers play so much cricket all over the world in different formats, and fast bowlers are probably the most vulnerable considering how much pressure their body goes through to deliver. Now, the next big series that India is going to go to is to England for a test series in the middle of this year, which will follow the Champions Trophy. I'm interested to see what fast bowling quartet or trio or bowling lineup the Indian team is going to take over, mainly because it is probably going to be more pace bowling friendly pitches, not spin bowling friendly pitches that we're going to see over there. Kishan, what are your thoughts on where the Indian cricket team is heading going into the future, particularly in reference to Test cricket?
Well, I think what India showed is they, especially in Australia, was they are a team in transition. You look at with the fast bowlers, you look at guys like Harshit Rana, Akash Deep, Prasidh Krishna, that all who have played minimal or playing for the first time in Australia, produced moments of brilliance, but didn't have that consistency. Now, Prasidh Krishna's 28. He's not exactly young, and has suffered with back injuries in the past. But you'd hope that with a little bit more cricket under his belt, those bad balls are not going to come. So, and we saw on the batting side, Nitish Kumar Reddy was, quite frankly, a revelation. I don't think anyone saw him coming out to be India's top scorer after Jaiswal. But we saw a couple of young guys start to really assert themselves at the top of the order. So it'll be interesting. I mean, obviously, the million-dollar question is what will happen with Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma going forward. Will they be pushed? Will they leave on their own accord? Or will they get another go around? And I think the answers to that are going to be probably found in the Champions Trophy, whether they're picked, first of all, in the squad, and if they are picked in the squad, how they go. If they do go well, I think you'll see those guys again in England, which will be another interesting 5-test series starting a new World Test Championship cycle. So It's very, very hard to predict. I think there's talent there. There's a lot of depth in Indian cricket. There are also a lot of all-rounders, if you take into account the wicket keepers as well, guys like Dhruv Jurel, who could probably, who played in Perth as a specialist batsman. You guys got Washington Sundar and Reddy himself. There are a lot of all-rounders. Whether they stick with that format of kind of going with 3 all-rounders, 4 specialist batsmen, a wicketkeeper, and a bowlers, it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward.
And how about yourself, Hilsey? Where do you think this Australian cricket team is heading going into the future?
I think the Australian team, they're obviously like in the footy terms, they're in that premiership window being in the World Test Championship final. I personally would have thought that had Australia not qualified for that, or that still be it up in the air, we might have actually seen the goodbyes of Khawaja. But considering they're going to Sri Lanka for a 2-test series, he's probably the best player in the spin, so he'll obviously be over there. And we might see a couple of people. Like, I don't think we'll see Mitch Marsh again, even though there's still that World Test Championship final in the UK. Then they go to West Indies for a Test series before next year's Ashes here in Australia. So I think they're going to be chips in at the moment, and we might see a little bit of an exodus or a bit of a transition after the World Test Championship. There's obviously going to be a little bit of experimentation going in Sri Lanka just because the conditions are so different to what they're going to have in any other part of the world. They're going to try out a few things, obviously Cummins and whatnot aren't going. But I think it is exciting for Australia because now that they've won this BGT, all the eyeballs are on them. A few people who are cricket fanatics will be watching in Sri Lanka to see how someone like a Cooper Connolly goes, how Boland can go outside of Australia, for example. And then when it is Ashes time, after the World Test Championship, it's going to be Ashes time. So it's going to be pretty exciting as well. And yeah, I'm hopeful. I think the Aussies will be okay in the Test arena with a little bit of transition, but yeah, still all eyes on the new players coming in post that World Test Championship.
And I think one of the great things about Australian cricket, and you sort of touched on it there, Hilsey, is about Pat Cummins and his leadership. We spoke initially at the start of this series about the legacy that someone like Andrew McDonald and Pat Cummins is going to have on themselves and as a team, especially post one of these big contentions with another big test-playing nation. And I think both of their statuses has probably been elevated. From all reports, Pat Cummins and the leadership team is just a remarkable, settled, non-reactive to emotion setup where they are really leading their men by example. And so I think it's going to be great to see how Pat Cummins goes in the World Test Championship and then the Ashes coming up as well to probably solidify his legacy even further. That's all we have time for here at the Midwicket Podcast. That's a wrap-up of the Border Gavaskar Trophy. Hilsey, just want to say a big thank you to you for joining us for this 5-test series. Thank you so much, Hilsey.
My pleasure. Always happy to have a dross about cricket, and it's been great.
And as well, Kishan, who started out in an apartment in Melbourne and now has ended up all the way in Bangalore at the end of this series. Kishan, thank you so much for your views and opinions through this Midwicket Podcast.
No worries, boys. It's always fun.
Great. Thank you all for listening in, for tuning in. That'll be it for this season. Let's see how we go for the Ashes coming up and maybe even a series in between. Keep an eye out for some special episodes with some special guests through the off season with the Midwicket Podcast. All of you have a great time. Have a great day. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good one.